Recently, local newspapers ran stories on Botswana's leading businesses. One of those stories covered businessman and politician Satar Dada's chicken farm. Questions regarding the story's factuality and the power of business over the press has brought into light the contentious relationship between business and the media. Studies around the world have yielded a variety of complaints about the media from business. 4 general criticisms stated most frequently are: simplistic reporting of complex issues and problems, careless, negligent and inaccurate reporting, exaggeration and sensational reporting, and the overemphasizing of negative news and an indication of anti-business bias. The media in turn raised complaints about members of the corporate world withholding and at times providing inaccurate information. And at a higher level, there are concerns of business using their clout to muzzle their activity. Which of these objections are warranted? And how can a conducive relationship between these two important sectors be achieved? Join us tonight as my co-presenter Shadi Lintswe speaks to both representatives from the news media industry and from the business community as we get an in-depth look into this issue. I'm Nameto Sibina. This is First Issues. Journalistic integrity, corporate influence, and the testy relationship between business and media. These are issues that have been brought to the forefront recently since the publishing of a controversial article. Businessman Mr. Satar Dada gave us his account of the highly publicized story. He points to unethical practices within the local media.
Well, it happened to me of late, where the Dada's Chicken Company, and they wrote a lot of things out of context. And if you look at those stories and the facts that they tried to give, was nothing to do with the chicken industry or the quantity of brine that we use in the industry. We've got certain levels which are regularized by, we do it for KFC, we do it for Nando's, we do for Hungry Lion, and they all have their own formula what we should use, even the spices. But if you look at inside the page, they put a picture which has nothing to do with Tswana Pride. And if you had looked at that chicken, it was a potential libelous case, because the fact of the matter was that picture had nothing to do with Tswana Pride. I don't know where they took it. There was a shovel. It would appear that they mix chicken using a shovel. We have state-of-the-art equipment which does the job. In fact, if you went to Tswana Pride, you will not find anybody touching a piece of chicken, because it all goes through the machine and the line. And then it goes through the spiral machine. At the end of the day, it goes into a plastic bag and sealed, weighed, and out of the way. So people don't touch it. So they do sensationalize. What they should have done is basically checked the content, gone to the farm, and ask for an interview or whatever, and then do the story.
Another photograph used alongside the stories on the raid of Dada's chicken farm showed policemen with visors, helmets and batons, and was also not actually taken at the scene of the incident. Is this not misleading to the public? How ethical are these examples of photojournalism?
There are times when we write stories and we don't have the right visuals, because we would not be there when certain things happen. Like for instance, in this particular instance, when the raid took place at Mr. Dada's farm, we were not there, but you see, we learn about the story later. When now a decision is taken as to what kind of a picture we're going to use, obviously we're going to use Dada's picture like we did, but then there would be another picture which tries to illustrate, which tries to give a picture of what could have happened in a situation where such an event was taking place. That picture that we use, of course, it was not taken at that event, but the picture on its own tries to illustrate a police raid, because here it's about police raiding. If you look at that picture, it has that connotation of a raid.
I know that journalists have the prerogative to look at file pictures that they can use. But that does not allow them to abuse that prerogative. Now, the story relating to the chicken farm, Yaga Red Dada, is a bit interesting. I don't know the facts to be completely sure what was happening at Red Dada's farm. But you then carry a foul picture of helmeted policemen with batons. No, I don't think, in my judgment, I don't think that's fair. It can create misconceptions, and it can create a belief that we were twisting the story so that it can suit or sell our papers. Sometimes that's what people are saying, and that probably could ring true if you look at the photos and you don't understand the story. So yes, I think that story's picture can be seen as one where you have embellished your story so that it can attract people to, especially when we're dealing with people such as the treasurer of the BDP. That's a big story.
Examples of this kind of problematic reporting has created a strain between the media and the business community. Members of the business fraternity shared their now disenchanted perceptions with us.
Well, they have a way of sensationalizing stories. If you walk to go and buy a paper, you will first look at the headline, always. And you'll find something attracts you. And when you pick up the paper, the story on the headline is different from the one that is inside. Many times they don't even do a research. And the story in the front page is totally different from what is inside. So yes, sensationalization, it appears, is the order of the day with the newspapers.
Two things are happening there with headlines. The first thing is the headlines that go on the front pages. Okay, and these are sometimes the ones that people have the biggest problem with. The purpose of the headline on the front page is to get people to buy the newspaper. In order to get someone to pick up your newspaper and buy it, you need to attract them. And the only way that you can attract them is with a big headline and some kind of sensational picture if you got it. Okay, that means they have bought the paper. If you look inside the paper and these headlines, there's a different thing going on there. People don't read every story in a newspaper. It's not like a book. You start on page 1 and you go through to the final page. They flick through the newspaper to see what attracts them and then that attracts the eye, and then they read the story underneath it. So the headlines are trying to attract the eye. Behind your question, I think, is the criticism, is that sometimes the headlines and the stories, they don't match up. The headline offers more than the story delivers. That's bad journalism. That means that the headline writer needs to go back to school, because you can only do that once. You can only fool the reader once. They've seen the headline, they've read the story, didn't realise they've been fooled. They're not going to trust any of the other headlines, and they won't trust your newspaper, so they won't buy it next week. And there's lots of other newspapers they can buy as an alternative.
We sometimes just ask ourselves whether the media has an agenda against business or for business. I think we need to go back to the drawing board as the media and ask ourselves, what is it that we want to do for business, with business? Is it because we want to sell the paper more than doing our role as carrying the message? Because there are a lot of instances where we have seen issues that we believe have been overrated or over-sensationalized, I would say.
This country is very secretive. The facts are difficult to come out. Nobody can tell you the truth unless they want that truth to come out. So they will give you partial information that you then work with like clay without water to smooth the clay as you mold it.
I would like to say that Bokim is here as the voice of business. And mind you, a lot of the media houses are members of Bokim. We are a conduit for information dissemination, and we believe that the media should actually come and sit with us on the table and seek information. If it's information about our members, we should be able to facilitate that interaction to allow the smooth flow of information and to reduce what seems to be frictions at times. Because the effect of that, as I said, is actually not portraying Botswana as a destination for an investor who's sitting out there. We would like an investor sitting out there to say, hey, I wanted to come out of South Africa. Or Botswana is just across the border and it's a place to go and do business in.
You mentioned that the headline is to grab the reader, usually the one on the front page, in order for people to buy the newspaper. Is there some sort of compromise between business, pushing the business of the newspaper, as well as the ethics?
Well, there could be. I'm not sure if compromise is quite the right word, but let's remember that newspapers are businesses, and all businesses have to make a profit. That's the way of the capitalist world, and nobody's disagreeing with that here, I don't think. So in order to make a profit, you have to do two things. You have to get people to buy your newspaper and pay money for it in the store. And the other thing is you have to attract advertisers in order to advertise in your newspaper, yeah? So in order to do all of those things, you have to have people buying your newspaper, yeah? Now, whether that's a compromise, that's a business necessity. You can't get away from that, unless it's a government financed newspaper. We have one of those here, but most of them aren't, okay? So in order simply to continue as a business, you need to be able to make sales. Now, how do you make sales? You make your newspaper as attractive as you possibly can to your readers, okay? One tactic is to have sensational headlines so that people will buy it once, okay? Doesn't necessarily mean that they will buy it week after week. In order to do that, you have to have a total product that satisfies them. They liked reading it last week, it comes out again on Friday or Thursday or Wednesday, they're likely to enjoy reading the next one, okay? And it goes on like that. So a relationship builds up between the newspaper and the reader. In some ways, that's very much a commercial relationship. It doesn't mean that the newspaper has to be unethical in doing that. The two things can go side by side quite easily.
Could it be that a certain amount of embellishment is standard practice when it comes to the selling and packaging of stories?
Well, I can't say it's part and parcel, but I think there are times when it happens. It's not what is supposed to happen all the time. But of course, like I'm saying, you see, we coming from different backgrounds, we coming from different newsrooms. So whatever happens in one newsroom doesn't necessarily happen in another newsroom. So you may find there could be a story in my newsroom which was sensationalized, but it doesn't necessarily mean that because that story is in my newspaper, then you're going to say everybody's doing that. If it happens with me, it should be looked at from that perspective that it happened in one establishment, not that everybody now has to take the blame for that.
It's wrong to mislead the public, whether through a headline or even through a story. It is not a part of journalism. It is not part of our mandate to mislead people. We should always report true and balanced news. We tell people the truth. We should not be seen to be trying to influence people negatively based on reports that cannot be verified by anyone. Actually, that is why when I receive a news tip as a journalist, I would first try to establish the authenticity of the news tip itself. I will go to the authorities to establish if that which I got it's a true report. Then from there, I'll make sure that I balance. I go to both sides. Whoever is mentioned in that tip, I should make sure that I give them a side. It is very dangerous for a newspaper to sensationalize on the basis that they want to sell newspapers.
Sensationalism in itself creates a problem if professionalism is not at the core of the particular story writer. If, for example, they will concoct facts. If, for example, they will rely on elements of saying, we tried to get in touch with so to verify our information, the phone rang on and on. When the issue is, did you have to rush to have that story come out before you got all the facts? So sometimes, to me, that bothers me as an individual that is involved with media. I'm bothered that in many a times, sensationalism has come about because our journalists have come on the last day to try and meet the dictates of the paper that evening on the last hour, and they think they can get all the information they need.
But the news media had their own bones of contention with the business community as well, as my co-presenter Shadi Linswe finds out.
The media has sometimes accused the business community of using their muscle to stifle press freedom. Do you think that this is a fair accusation or criticism by the media?
No, I don't think it's fair, because I think when the story comes out, the business community has a right to complain if the story is sensationalized.
I think the media should be fair to the business community. Firstly, let's understand that the media is there to serve not only the public, but the business community. The business community is a very important partner when it comes to the business of the media itself. They provide the income that media houses live on. And I think for them to believe or to think that the business houses are being unfair to them, it's also very unfair. I believe there's a platform that we, as the business community, and I'm talking here about the private media, there is a platform that we can create for ourselves to actually have this understanding of where is it that we want to go, how do we want to work. Because at the end of the day, whatever friction is happening between the business and the media, it is actually being portrayed out there in the world. The question that we need to ask ourselves, is this the image that we want to show about Botswana? We should live above our own interests, whether it's the media or the business. Let's live above those and look at what is the objective that we want to achieve as a country.
The relationship between media and printers presents yet another sticking point in this already frayed liaison, in which media accuse business of overstepping their function, and printers argue that their job description entails a certain level of responsibility for the published content.
When we accept to print any article, we give them like a contract when we do that quotation. I can show you here on one of the contracts here, which says on Article 10, the printer shall not be required to produce any matter which in his opinion is illegal or defamatory, notwithstanding the discretion given to the printer in this clause. In other words, we have a disclaimer which says that if we find that the article is not correct, and we could be sued, because remember, if the printer, if the paper is sued, we as the printer also get sued. So we cover ourselves for that. We don't want to be attending court cases all the time when the journalists are making a mistake.
Ms. Machalo Ellis earlier said that the media are there to serve the public and business. Could it be that this strained relationship is the result of a misunderstanding of the media's role? Is there something that we as consumers simply do not understand about the media?
People think that the media are the public relations officers. The media will do public relations for you. And therefore, sometimes you say they don't publish this about me, or they don't do this about, even when I do good things, they don't. It is not imperative on the media to become public relations officers. The media pick news that they think has an impact on society. They choose and target what they will put on their paper based as a business, based on whether this will definitely help encourage society there to see their paper or their radio station as worth listening to. The second element is where society challenges how far the media should go. Just as a media, as journalists, agalena mo ka tunke dipiri tsa batho ko go sa tsenwe ga gona ntwe ya motsetsi ko le ka se ke le tsene teng. My belief is that as more and more society members become acceptable to the dictates of democracy, where everybody must be allowed to blossom, and not only a few, and where corruption and misdeeds are not condoned, irrespective of who does them, where people do not have it easy because of their history, the names that come with so-and-so, they can find jobs at the... When we start living in that type of democracy, then we will see that media will assist in even in creating a greater space for that type of interaction. Then we will reduce the conflict that exists between public figures, politicians, NGOs, business, in their interaction. And in that process, they will help the media grow, because they will also assist in bringing resources into the media.
What I think is a problem sometimes with our consumers is that there are certain things that they want to know, and there are certain things that they don't want to know. If you report on a certain one aspect today, they will be happy. The next day you're going to report about something, they're not going to be happy. When you do that, all of a sudden the media becomes the bad guy. The media has played a very important role in this country, where they have reported on issues. They affect people directly. Issues that impact on the lives of people in this country. Whether it's the social issues, the political issues, the economic issues. Of course, there would be times where we write stories, I would say, the scandals. You see, the scandals are always there. And when a scandal comes about, we can't just look away and say, because it's about Jacob Sissinyi, for instance, we can't write. Our business is not about writing for Jacob Sissinyi. It's about writing for the public to know what is happening. So I think generally, my answer to the question would be, I think our consumers don't seem to understand what the role of the media is.
You'll find that there are instances where the media or a newspaper or a radio station was correct in the way it portrayed a certain incident or the way it put out a report. Just that maybe the fact that people don't necessarily understand the trade itself and how it's supposed to be implemented out there tends to be confusing a bit. But it's also our bit as the industry to make sure that people understand our role.
Our subject tonight has pointed to probable fundamental challenges to local media's ability to perform their function as the fourth estate, in which they present an accurate picture of issues of social relevance for the public good. Join us next week as we take a closer look at the press and into what the hindrances to the maturation of this industry could be. Beginning our examination from the education that our journalists receive to the very structures that govern their function in society.
How come bad practices are still allowed to continue though?
How much attention is paid to the repercussions that a careless story can have?
What do you teach to journalism students in order to make them competent professionals?